Finding true freedom in video games.
Feeling in video games than the sense of being able to find your own fun. Like you could do anything, go anywhere, be anyone, and be safe in the knowledge that the game is going to let you do it. I'm talking about stuff like using physics mechanics to engineer catapults that fling you across the world, the fun of figuring out strategies and synergies that even the developers didn't intend, or even something as simple as picking a giant mountain on the horizon and thinking, yeah, I'm going to go climb that. The allure of
Bro, Skyrim was like one of the first games to do that, the whole gigantic sandbox thing. And you see that mountain? You can go to that thing. And when I played that game, like Skyrim, oh my god, I sunk hundreds of hours. I mean, granted, this is back in like when it first came out, I think on 360 or something. Yeah, dude, that game was something else, man.
personal freedom in video games has been a fixture of the gaming psyche for decades, with many of the most influential early video games like Colossal Cave Adventure, The Legend of Zelda, and Rogue directly tapping into the freedom of player choice and autonomy that interactive media offers. And let's not forget that one of the main reasons why Dungeons & Dragons, the granddaddy of RPGs, became and remains so popular is because of the potentially limitless scope for adventure offered by a combination of the game's flexible rules and the player's imagination. Getting to
Oh yeah, Dungeons and Dragons was awesome. Like at least the tabletop version, because essentially you could do anything that you wanted to, more or less. You know, yeah, there was a lot of like acrobatics, strength, and combat stuff, but as far as the RP aspect goes, like you could do anything. Me and my buddies had tons of fun playing D&D.
pursue your own playstyle, make your own decisions, and flex your creative muscles feels great because not only is it a way to customize the experience of a game to fit your own preferences, but the very act of making those choices gets you more invested in what's going on. In Minecraft, one of the most player-empowering games of all time, for example, if you need to get somewhere, you can literally reshape the world to do so. And if you need somewhere to hide from monsters, you can just build your own base from the ground up out of whatever materials your heart desires. These kinds of choices aren't merely strategic, they're you making your own mark on the game. Even in less sandboxy games, like, say, Outer Wilds, which route you take through the game, how you end up interpreting the story, and your many deaths are just as much a part of your adventure as the big puzzle solutions. But this is all information you probably knew already. Freedom is fun, who would have guessed? It's almost like it's a human right or something. What makes matters more difficult is that this process of finding our own fun and exerting our own control over the games we play is a little bit more complex than it might appear.
Yeah, because essentially at the end of the day, depending on what game you're playing, the developers of your favorite game have an idea, an image in their head how players should play. But as a player, you have the option to do that, or you could try to, do your own thing. And when players go off and do their own thing, that's when there's a little bit of headbutting.
For example, there are loads of games out there with massive scope for player freedom and choice, but they end up not being anywhere near as satisfying as much smaller, more restrictive games. Many big open world titles offer these massive sandboxes for you to exert your will over, but after a couple of killing sprees and adventures in stolen jets, you kinda lose interest. And looty-shooty games like Borderlands or Destiny might offer 18 squillion different guns, all with unique properties that base a huge number of possible builds around, but you're just going to use that legendary one.
Yeah, you're just going to use the meta gun, the one gun that is best in most situations. You're going to use the Unkempt Herald. That's it.
Aren't you? These games might offer a lot of choices, but more often than not, these decisions, weirdly, rarely feel like they end up mattering. Not only that, there's the philosophical issue with the fact that no video game will ever really be able to let you play the way you want. Your autonomy in a game is ultimately going to be limited to what the developers have put in it, and they don't have infinite time.
Right.
As much as you might want to fob off that whole Reaper thing and retire happily with Garrus to raise your adopted child Joker in Mass Effect, it's simply not possible without a lot of modding. And even then, I can't find one. So, If massive scope for player autonomy can unintuitively make your freedom feel like it doesn't matter, and you're never really in control when playing a game anyway, how the hell do developers manage to pull off the magic trick of letting us think we're deciding our own destinies in the first place? Well, the
That's a
trick
good
to
question.
unraveling what seems to be a massive paradox is to understand that the fun and satisfaction of making our own way in a game doesn't actually come from total freedom to do whatever we want.
No, it's the illusion of freedom is essentially what they're creating for the player.
And it's actually about giving us a feeling that while our decisions are bound by certain limits, they are still important. And there is one game in particular that does this fantastically, but I'll get back around to it later. A great way to explain what I mean is through the lens of art games. And I don't mean like Braid, I mean games that are literally about making art. A large portion of the fun of creative work is the freedom you have to express yourself however you like, but being free from challenge or consequences can actually harm the experience when you're playing a game about that stuff. In art school, which, yes, is pronounced that way, you've got to draw whatever this computer tells you to, and after you're done, it'll magically judge your work and give you a finishing grade. Sounds like a great excuse to be creative, right? Well, it is, until you work out that the computer's feedback is 100% random. You could draw exactly
Immersion broken. Damn it.
the same thing and get different results both times, or just draw some genitals and get an A.
Yeah.
Art school technically gives you total freedom because you can draw whatever you like and still progress, but because that freedom, and by extension your own creativity, is meaningless within the context of the game, the satisfaction of self-expression you'd normally get totally evaporates. Compare that to Passepartout the Starving Artist, which gives your creativity meaning by tying it to some actual systems. Different clients prefer certain colours and shapes and will even judge you based on how long you spent painting a particular piece. It's hardly sophisticated image recognition, but simply tasking you with feeling out the wants and needs of your audience and painting accordingly creates much more fulfilling results because the choices you make have a direct impact on the way the game responds to you. In fact, the image recognition systems in Passepartout being easily cheesed is itself another avenue of creativity, and working out that I could just do this to trick the public into thinking I was a minimalist genius was the highlight of my playthrough, and meant that much more because it had actual ramifications, as opposed to it getting the same feedback as
Shrek.
literally anything else. This is the same reason why I vastly preferred the stylish Umurangi generation to the lovely cute Toem. In Umurangi, taking good photos is pretty challenging, and you've got to really get creative in order to snag the best shots. But in Toem, there's really only one way to get each photo, and the game doesn't really care how good each one is. It's not enough to simply let players do whatever they like without any resistance or consequences whatsoever. Players and developers alike can often get so focused on the abstract idea of freedom and creating an infinitely wide scope of play that they often aren't able to make that freedom empowering and meaningful. The same is true for more strategic decision making as well. Often by reducing and restricting the number of options we as players have, games can weirdly create much more nuanced tactical landscapes. I'll never pass up the opportunity to use XCOM as an example, and it's a great one for this. In the
Bro, I tried playing XCOM on multiple different occasions, and I just couldn't. That is just not my game. No.
original reboot game, you technically had much more tactical scope to handle alien engagements because usually the only objective was that you killed all the Xenos. This led to players defaulting to a single, incredibly boring strategy of camping in Overwatch until the aliens came to you and ignoring any other number of options because they were just riskier.
Bro, I didn't even know that was an option. I thought I had to engage the aliens. What the heck?
So, in XCOM 2, the developers added a timer to most missions to prevent Overwatch camping and other overly defensive strategies, and in doing so, elevated a bunch of other, much more interesting options into viability, making these choices much more rich and interesting even if you technically had fewer options. As Soren Johnson, lead designer of Civ 4 and creator of the fantastic Old World and Off-World trading company famously said, given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game.
Oh yeah, that is the truest of truths that I have ever heard. So this is true for most games, and I'm gonna attempt to try to figure out why. So you can't really optimize. I mean, you can always optimize anything out of a game or whatever. So if you're playing like an FPS game, there's gonna be like a meta gun or loadout or set of characters, if you're playing like some sort of hero shooter thing, that overall they just perform better on average. This is normal, because people in general, they will, if given the option, they will always take the path of least resistance, even in competition. The goal of like any sort of competition is to get the most desirable result for the least effort. Nobody is going into a competition trying to get like the least desirable result with the most effort. Now, if you're in a competition, let's say like a game tournament or whatever, everybody wants that number one spot, all right? So, you have to put not necessarily like the absolute most effort forward. You just have to put the most effort relative to that second place person. You just have to perform slightly better than them. All right? That's all. And this is true with even in sports, basketball, soccer, or whatever. This is true for that even, all right? So even in competition, this is true. Given the option, players are just going to optimize the fun out of everything. So even in casual games, this is true. So like right now for Diablo 4, I'm playing. There's meta builds. The build can either be viable or not viable. It's good for like clearing trash, or it's only good for killing like a boss, like a single boss or whatever. There's not a lot of, up until like level, I don't know, I'd say 70, 80-ish. There's like a little bit of wiggle room with how creative you can be, like just on your own without using like any guides, whatever. But that you're gonna reach a point in that game where you just have to look at a guide. If you're good enough to not use a guide, great. But me, I suck at those types of games. I need a guide. All right, it is what it is. So the whole thing with players optimizing the fun out of games is because players don't want to have their time wasted. So because of that, they want to feel like their time is they're being efficient with their time with whatever game they're playing. So I usually find this in a lot of games or whatever. There's like this trickle down effect of knowledge. Like there's the no life gamers for this game. They figure some stuff out and then they post it up on the internet for whatever. And then eventually everybody just congregates around that. And then that becomes the meta of that game. So yeah, that's pretty much what happens in game after game that happens. I guess this is kind of because I would say most people that play video games don't have a lot of money. Playing video games is a very like, I don't know, this is gonna sound stupid, but like most people who play video games are probably like there's not a lot of millionaires like that play video games like on like relative. Like yes, there's like a bunch of streamers with like millions and millions of like dollars or whatever, but like what I'm saying is like if you were to pick like any game and you have like a chart, the amount of players that have like millions of dollars are like is going to be so fine and like few versus like the other players that are maybe like in middle class and like lower class or whatever. They just want to play the game and have fun. All right, they need something to do. All right, they can just sit in their house, chill, relax, and just have fun. All right, and because of that, they don't want to feel like their time is being wasted. All right, they don't want to go with like the non-meta build. All right, because that's too time consuming. All right. So yeah, but let me hear what you got to say about this.
And this is as much true for questions of player autonomy as it is balance. Players love being able to express themselves, but they also love winning. And that's why it's important to ensure that there is no easy best option, because most players are just going to pick that if they have the chance, eliminating all the fun of coming up with a strategy yourself. This is the reason why Magic the Gathering splits its cards into 5 different colours of mana, to ensure that you can't just easily play all the best ones and have to contend with some weaknesses in your game plan.
Right.
Yu-Gi-Oh, on the other hand, has no such cost restriction.
Oh yeah, season 1 or whatever, Gen 1 of Yu-Gi-Oh, so fucking busted. All right, this dude's setting up the Exodia with the pot of greed, all the drawing, and like discard some, draw some more type deal, just to farm all the Exodia pieces. You can literally like just give 1 turn in Yu-Gi-Oh season 1 or whatever.
And so literally every deck ran 4 copies of Pot of Greed, as well as other slightly less busted variations of the card, because there was basically no reason not to. This severely cut down on deck variety until these cards got banned, along with like a million other cards, because Yu-Gi-Oh sucks. The takeaway here is that there is a tangible and crucial difference between player freedom and player agency. When we think about games that really scratch that itch of being able to find our own fun and do what we want, more often than not, the appeal of these games comes from our individual decisions having a large visible impact, as opposed to the possibility space we have being particularly broad. Take the immersive sim genre for example. I mean, games like Deus Ex, Dishonored, Hitman, you get the picture. These games are great at making you feel like you're in a living, breathing world you can interact with and react to. But the trick to this feeling is that most of these games have strict mechanical limits that guide your playstyle, and they all take place in completely closed ecosystems with stories and characters that are more or less completely insulated from your actions. Arcane is probably the company that does this stuff best, and they're great at making games that have a strong, mostly linear narrative focus as well as high levels of player agency. And they do this by cleverly treating the player's story and the player character's story as separate but linked entities. In Deathloop, for example, you're given an insane amount of freedom to mess with the environment and kill the other main characters however you like, using a huge variety of mechanics, techniques, and other fun emergent systems to do so at any point you like. However, because the game is based around a time loop, nothing you can really do can derail the plot, because most of it happened before you started playing, and everything's just going to reset next loop anyway. Similarly, in Prey, the game loves handing you really flexible, creative tools like the glue gun, foam dart launcher, and mimic power that open up massive amounts of choices for how you interact with the world of Talos 1, with the glue gun in particular having an entire game's worth of really creative traversal applications, like letting you build bridges, seal up hazards, and even climb walls if you're smart with it. However, despite the amount of sequence breaking and climbing around you can do, Prey smartly locks away its story choices before you can mess with the narrative too much. You can't kill the helpful robots January or December until after they've told you about their respective plans and your backstory. And Alex, the other main character, spends most of the game in his inaccessible panic room and gets to have a whole character arc before you're even allowed to see him in person, at which point he promptly falls unconscious until the end of the game. Even in Dishonored, undoubtedly the Arcane game that gives the player the most narrative agency, almost all of your choices are invariably funneled into being either low or high chaos. The way you killed someone, your reasons for doing so, whether that guard spotted you taking his unconscious friend for a little walk, it doesn't really affect anything but your chaos score, which is the single variable that actually determines how the game reacts. This is actually quite clever, because it doesn't curtail some of the player's more violent impulses or wackier assassination schemes, but it also doesn't let the player influence too much outside of a given level. The chaos system really only changes surface level stuff like dialogue and the positioning of certain enemies. Your actions in Dishonored don't really affect the plot in any meaningful way until the final level, at which point you're about to give up control anyway. This is what I mean by agency meaning more to us as players than outright freedom. Being able to shape your personal experience with a game is much more important than massively changing the story, how the fundamental mechanics work, or the overall structure. Which brings me on to a game I mentioned earlier. Yes, it's XCOM again. No, it's not, it's Sable, which is a very interesting and absolutely gorgeous game that sees you playing as a young woman, also called Sable, zooming around the desert on a coming-of-age journey to find out what kind of person she wants to be, represented by her wandering the world, exploring and doing odd jobs before she eventually figures out where she belongs in society and picks out a mask she's going to wear for the rest of her life. Because of Sable's freeform structure, once you've beaten the tutorial, you can accept that you're going to be part of the Ibex clan forever and end the game more or less right away. But far more likely is that you're going to have a whirlwind series of mini adventures along the way. You might, for example, stumble on this big hive of insects and have to do a bit of puzzling to find a way past this bastard. You might go on a trip to this big bridge and the ancient ruins that surround it, or you might even decide to become a creepy vigilante superhero. What's great about this is that as you end up gravitating to particular kinds of activity over the course of your gliding, you'll earn badges that can end up being redeemed for the very masks that will decide the kind of person Sable ends up becoming. Do you like spelunking around in crashed spaceships and making a boatload of money to upgrade your hoverbike? Well, doing that will eventually earn you the Scrapper mask. Do you like platforming and climbing up or down big structures to see where they're hiding? Well, doing so will usually end up completing objectives or quests that will earn you your Climber's badges, which can be forged into the Climber's mask, and so on. On an individual level, basically none of Sable's episodic quests give you any freedom at all, and there are never really any choices that matter beyond deciding to do the quest to begin with. However, at a macro scale, all Sable really does is provide just enough resistance to your exploration to make that journey satisfying, and just enough character and world building for you to make an informed choice on where Sable should fit into it, which, as far as creating a feeling of agency goes, is all you need.
Bro, this game totally reminds me of like Jet Set Radio Future, but in the desert, it seems.
It's gonna sound weird, but I think that all the best games where you're allowed to find your own fun are sort of shaped like a lemon. Bear with me here. You start from a solid, defined beginning, things taper outwards to give you a lot of freedom in the midsection, before drawing back in for a definitive, tightly controlled ending.
Ah, okay, I get it. I think he's onto something. And this is just freedom. You know, in the beginning, there's not a lot of freedom. And then as you get toward the middle, there's a bunch of freedom, and then you keep going, and then there's less and less freedom. This is time goes on, and this is player scope.
Disco Elysium does this really well. Your character has a fixed backstory, and the game will always end with you going through some set pieces to catch the killer, but you can have a totally different experience with the game depending on which skills you level up, because the ones you've chosen to boost will constantly talk to you and change your perception of the world. Upon meeting terrifying preteen Kuno, for example, high empathy characters will see the hidden trauma behind his facade and might be convinced to help him, while leveling up physical skills means you'll probably just get goaded into punching him in the face as your logic begs you to reconsider. Two completely different outcomes that drastically change how the story feels and the kind of character you've crafted without really affecting the core mystery at all. This approach of allowing players a high degree of agency, but always within the context of a fundamentally contained experience, is sort of the best of both worlds, because it means that developers don't need to make multiple different games to account for each possible decision a player can make, but instead a single one with a lot of variables that can be approached from a variety of different directions. Ultimately, video games are a collaborative art form, with the designer and player working together to create the end product. It doesn't matter so much whether the designer is taking the reins or giving the player freedom to decide how the experience takes shape, so long as that relationship is communicated clearly. It's when the
communicated clearly. So what happens a lot of the time is the communication is not clear, and again, that's where a lot of the headbutting comes in. Oh, I want to play like this. Well, we don't want you to play like that. We want you to play like this. So we're going to nerf this and we're going to buff that and so on and so forth. You're doing too good. We're going to nerf everything. Blah, blah, blah. You got to play like this.
The developer-player relationship isn't clearly outlined that we run into problems, like people expecting more freedom out of Telltale games and Mass Effect than the developers were actually capable of giving them.
Yeah, but in the Telltale games or Mass Effect, how much more freedom do you want, you know? It's like you go to a planet, and then the planet is essentially just like a sandbox map type thing, and then maybe there's a couple areas, and then you have to like travel to those areas, and those areas are just like a map, so there's not that much freedom. Like, if you want to go to a planet and have this gigantic map, bro, you're asking for like so much for each like planet to be. It's like, imagine if each planet in Mass Effect, each planet was like the size of like a Skyrim map or like a Legend of Zelda map. That the amount of time it would take to make that is insane. All right, there has to be like a little bit of give and take.
And that's not even mentioning mods and alternate unintended ways of playing a particular game, which are in many ways the ultimate expression of flexible player-driven gameplay, using the foundation and structure of a game to have an entirely different kind of fun of your own design. If Pokemon didn't have so much untapped potential, stuff like Nuzlocke runs where you can only catch a certain amount of critters and they're dead for good if they faint wouldn't be possible. And without people taking the bones of Warcraft 3 and modding them to hell, we'd never have gotten Dota or Tower Defense. And also I'd probably have about 2,000 hours of my life back. Freedom and autonomy when it comes to video games is a very tricky topic indeed, and it's something that not even Sable gets quite right. The mask you're wearing doesn't really matter all that much in regular gameplay, and it'd be nice to get more of an epilogue after you finish your gliding. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? Video games exist in this weird space where you're able to interact with everything and anything, but never with total freedom. And I think that conflict is part of what makes them so interesting. So, the next time a game gives you a chance to express yourself, try thinking about why you're being given this chance and how free you actually are to make it. It's a good way of distracting yourself from the knowledge that you, subjectively, have no way of knowing whether you have free will or not. I mean, I know I do, I just don't know whether you've got it. You know? Hello and welcome to the After the Video segment, that liminal space where I talk to you about some people who are much cooler than me and more deserving of your attention and sycophantic praise. I can only take so much, after all. In terms of a YouTuber you should take a look at, I can't recommend Hot Cider any more highly. His best videos, on top of being smart and insightful, focus on off-the-wall topics and games in ways that I've never seen before, like a deep dive on the emerging genre of Wario-likes, a fantastic time-looping look at Deathloop, as well as a collection of micro-video essays on a variety of topics from some of the best in the business. Oh, by the way, if you've ever seen a nice thumbnail on a gaming video essay, chances are it's a Hot Cider original, so you know the editing and visual design of his videos are going to be on point. As for the other people you ought to congratulate, well, they're my patrons, who in exchange for giving me money every month, get behind the scenes stuff, bonus content, and even some shoutouts over on the left there. In addition, it's worth knowing that supporting the channel on Patreon for just 1 month is worth more to me than a lifetime of ad views. So, as an extra incentive, if you become a patron, feel free to ad block the hell out of my videos, because, let's be honest, YouTube ads suck. Of course, if you're wonderful and beautiful enough to donate $10 a month, you get a special shout out all to yourself, along with my other mysterious benefactors, who are Alex.
Nice video. Again, Adam Millard is a goat at making all these videos, and it's really insightful because like normally whenever I just play a game, I don't think about like any of this shit, you know? So it's nice to have like another perspective, which is nice, like a nice change. Essentially, but yeah, this is a great video. I liked it. Yeah, go check out Adam. He's awesome. So that's pretty much it. That's all I gotta say. And yeah, take it easy, guys. Later.